Hello all, welcome to the Consistently OK podcast, a podcast where we dive into all things pop culture related from comics to films and everything in between. My name's Luke.
I'm Nick.
Join us every week for a podcast that doesn't set its bar too high or too low, but rather keeps it at a consistently OK level for your enjoyment.
Hello everyone, this week's podcast we're going to talk all about comics. This is the first volume we're going to do, so we're going to do several podcasts in the future all around comics because let's be fair, Nick, it is the thing we talk about the most in our day-to-day lives, texting each other and talking to each other. So why not do multiple podcasts on the subject?
Yeah, I don't think there's even going to be like an end volume. I think this is just going to keep going. To be honest, I think we'll have something to.
It's going to be like WrestleManias. It's just going to keep going and going and going, and going forever. So I guess we could start at the beginning of our love of comics.
Yeah.
Where we got into comics would probably be the ideal place. Do you want to start on that trip?
When did I get into comics? Okay, again, bringing up my brother, I got into them through him. He read a lot of Spawn, I believe it was, and maybe X-Files. I think they were the two that were sitting around. I could be wrong on that, but it was definitely Spawn. Again, I was way too young to be reading Spawn. Now that I look back at it, that's pretty hardcore. But yeah, so I got into it through Spawn. Always seemed to have those around. I think there was a lot of horror. I vaguely remember going to a comic shop in Stratford called Comic Legends, which is gone since.
Great shop.
Yep.
That's where my journey begins as well.
Good. I'm glad they'll get a lot of love on this podcast. But yeah, so started there, and I remember buying, I think it was Star Wars stuff and horrors, whether that was like zombie stuff kind of. I think I picked up a Dawn of the Dead from there. I have vague memories of, but yeah, so it was mainly through there, and yeah, just my brother kind of reading Spawn and I guess other pop culture kind of things that I think comics were always sort of around. I was very much into cartoons as well, like X-Men and Spider-Man, and so I think those two went hand in hand with sort of me learning about the comic book world. So yeah,
I'm really surprised we've already talked. I didn't actually think we would talk about X-Files comics and Dawn of the Dead. Did you say Dawn of the Dead comics?
Yeah, I've definitely got a Dawn of the Dead issue 1. It's like a red cover.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Two comic titles I didn't think we would come across in this, but as I said, it could have happened in the further volumes, but we've gone straight for X-Files comics.
Yeah.
Fantastic. And then you just, obviously we'll talk about your whole comic journey, but you've been into comics ever since then.
Yeah, to be honest, there was a period of time where I don't think I read many. Probably through like early high school, I don't really remember reading much and kind of taking in a lot of the comics. And then I think probably when I must have been around 15, 16, definitely remember reading Watchmen, 300, Sin City, and it must have been V for Vendetta, because again, my brother had V for Vendetta and Watchmen, so I read those two. He bought me that massive copy of 300, like the hardback one that's sort of weirdly shaped.
Beautiful. I have that right behind me.
So nice. He bought me that back from a trip that he went on to New York, which was the coolest gift ever. So I remember reading that. And I think, again, part of that was just knowing that comic book films were coming out. And I was
going to say, those are all very around the same time. V Vendetta, Watchmen, things like that.
Yeah, so I think it was sort of seeing those and thinking that stylistically they looked really cool, and then knowing that there was source material you could go to kind of get the lay of the land, as they say.
I know a lot of people that saw Sin City at the cinema, and that put them on track to start reading comics, because everyone was talking probably in their reviews that you could page for page, it looked very similar from page to screen. Yeah. I think with 300 as well, those kind of films made people realize that comics were where they should really be going to get their superhero stories or their comic stories.
Yeah, I think definitely you're right there, that the aesthetics of it, the visuals of it really leaned into the comic book, and so I think if you enjoyed that film, you're really likely to enjoy the comic book because it is so similar, and even down to like the stories in it and the dialogue, and it's almost completely word for word.
It is.
So yeah, so I think that was definitely part of it.
Yeah, nice.
How about you?
My journey started, I think it was 1990 something. I was about 11. I was at high school. Obviously, well, people won't know about Nick and I. We went to the same school, but years apart. When I was quite far on in high school, Nick was quite new to high school.
Yep.
But our families were linked in through different schools, primary school, high school. And Nick and I will probably get there, but we sort of fell back into friendship and comic brotherhood a bit later on. But when I was at school, at high school, I got into comics very young. I watched a lot of cartoons, like you said, the animation cartoons and everything. I was very, very into all those sort of things and computer games. And naturally, I just went into comics. I remember the first comic I read was a Spider-Man comic. It was just a really random Spider-Man comic from I don't know if it was from a comic shop. I just remember my mum bought me it. And I don't think it was an official publication Spider-Man comic. It was just someone had taken it, and I mean, Marvel must have backed it, I'm sure. But my mum gave me this comic. We were sitting in the car, and I remember reading it and being like, "Wow, cool! I've heard about I've seen the Spider-Man animation series, but I've never had him in a comic form." So I read that, and then from then on, about 11 years old, maybe, was just drawn into this world. And there was a shop where we grew up in Stratford-upon-Avon called Comic Legends, which was in this antique centre right at the back.
Yeah.
And you wouldn't know about it until you went around the corner and saw this very narrow staircase, and there was a Batman logo.
Yeah.
And if you went in there, kind of a winding staircase, and just rows and rows and rows and rows of comic boxes full of comics, some figures and things like that. When I first went in there, I was a bit overwhelmed because I hadn't really gone through comics before. There was X-Men, there was Spider-Man, there was Swamp Thing, and I thought I don't know where to start. But funnily enough, the first comic I brought from there was a Spawn comic. I don't know if it's because the film had been out and I knew about the film. I think I watched the film quite young on VHS.
Good.
And I remember the bloody clown in that being quite terrifying.
Yeah.
So I brought this Spawn comic home, and it was a random number, probably, I don't know, 100 or 60 or something.
Yeah.
So the context was completely gone. I didn't know what had happened before, and I didn't know where it was going to go necessarily. Of course, you never know where it's going to go in comics until you read it. And then I went back every week. I went back with a couple of friends from school.
Nice.
Just started buying comics left, right, and centre. I think the first main series I really got into was Ultimate Spider-Man, because that came out in about 2000, and it was the first issue 1 that I got a hold of.
Wow.
I remember getting the subscriptions at the excellent W.H. Smith's, which is obviously a household name to everyone.
Sorry to cut in there, were they selling actual comic books at that point, or was it the Panini ones?
It was the Panini. So that is the first one that my mum got me. I think it was Panini.
So it's Panini. Okay.
So it's not. So it's obviously Marvel have signed off on it probably, but they're not. They're not in the canon. They're just. There was like Wolverine versus Hulk and Spider-Man and X-Men, but they were in this horror. Well, I guess it's more current now with the way the covers were, but they weren't paper covers. They were they're laminated.
So they still covers. Do them.
Or do they?
Yeah, so when I was working, we'll get into this later on, but when I was working at the comic shop, we used to have like a trade-in service, so you could trade in all comics and we'd give you a credit or whatever. But so many people came in to sell those to us, and we just didn't take them because we only really dealt in the like proper back issues kind of ones. Yeah. I think what they do is they collect like 2 or 3 issues from a Marvel or DC run. So it is canonical, and it still runs in issue order, but there's something weird, like they're like 8 or 9 months behind.
I can't remember, because I didn't at the time when I used to have them. I had no idea. You know, if I was to pick them up now, I would probably notice straight away probably what comics they're from, or have some idea. and I'll probably recognize the writers' names or whatever. But back then, I had no idea. And until you just said that now, I can't remember the stories I've read, but I just know I had them. And I know I used to go into that shop and my mum used to get me them, basically. But I couldn't even remember it was Panini until you said. I remember Panini had football stickers. That was it.
Yeah.
So I went into the Witcherist and I got a subscription, and they put the Ultimate series, and then Ultimate X-Men came out, and then Fantastic Four. All of these were rebooted, and that was it. Then I remember just collecting them and getting sleeves for them, and I never looked back. I just kept going. And at high school, it was a bit of an odd time because I had one person at school. I had two people outside of school that like comics, and I had one person that I was really read Spider-Man, X-Men. We went to see all the films together. One of my best cinema experiences was seeing X-Men at the cinema with him. We were so excited. And it was a little bit of an embarrassment around it then. Kind of, you didn't want to, I wouldn't pull out comics at lunch in the common room or anything. Just kind of read at home. Always had comics in my bag though. And then I remember being at this, I was probably 18 at the time, I would have been. And he just turned around. I said to him, I just got the new Spider-Man issue. And he turned around in front of me and out loud said in front of everyone, we're too old for comics now, Luke.
Oh, no.
I was like, what? What do you mean we're too old for comics? I'll never be too old for comics, mate. I'm going to love comics forever. But he just shut me down completely. And it was almost like we had this secret relationship, and he was dumping me in front of everyone. But it was so, and I remember going home and thinking, what the fuck? What has just happened? And I remember, I can't remember, it was one of my brothers or my mum or someone said, I go, are you okay? I thought, no, I'm not okay. Like, my whole world's been turned upside down. The guy that I've collected comics with for 6 years has just turned his back on me. And ironically now, he's a complete geek again. I see him posting and talking about stuff all the time. But he turned his back on the industry, Nick. And in that, he turned his back on me. So anyway, after that moment, that distinct moment in my life, which set me on my course, I had a couple of years and I went to university, and I didn't have a lot of people there either that loved comics or read it. But by then, everything had got quite popular, and things like Forbidden Planet was a big place, comic shop, and the films were kicking off, not the Marvel cinematic ones necessarily, but things were happening. Iron Man was in production actually, and there was a bit more buzz. So it was easy for me to be like, I'm this huge geek. Everyone knew about it. Again, I just collected comics. I just fell in love with things like Hellboy, Spider-Man, X-Men, Turtles, Walking Dead. I remember reading The Walking Dead when it was quite early on, and when the TV show got announced, thinking, I know everything, but they changed a few things. So just that, I mean, we're asking about, I've gone way into the future now, but starting out with comics was simply, I got given a comic. I loved it, Spider-Man comic, and he's still my favorite superhero now, or best comics I read. I love that stuff. I love that shit, Nick.
Nice. Good man. Yeah. I like it. I like that you've had such a long history of it with no real pause. Like mine, there's definitely like clear years where I just didn't really engage with it, and then eventually when I did come back into it, which, I mean, even though I read those books when I was 15, 16, there was again a gap there where I think I sort of tinkered. It was like the odd graphic novel here and there. And then when I was about 20 and just about to start writing Snow the Dawn, I just dropped in heavily into comic books, and it was just anything and everything I could read, I was just going for. But yeah, I like that yours has been just such a long history of it.
But there's been heartache, obviously.
Yeah,
the guy who dumped me in the comic world.
Yeah.
But it's strange because I was still embarrassed about it, actually. I remember thinking that at university, I met my wife at university, and my bedroom, because I didn't stay at home. I was at home until I went to university, but I'd always been, don't know, my room never changed, basically. I had Spider-Man posters up there. I had comics everywhere.
Good. It
was a super geeky bedroom, and I had like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle figures. And I remember being in Southampton with my then girlfriend, I remember phoning my mum and saying, "You're gonna have to clear my room out because this girl is she can't know. She knows I like comics and things, but she can't know how bad it is. So I need you to take the Spider-Man poster from the door. I need you to, I don't know, put anything up other than just get rid of everything." And she didn't, of course.
Good.
And my wife didn't bat an eyelid. She knew I was already, she knew what she was committed to, this football comic loving person. But it was strange. It was strange to be a bit embarrassed by it when it generally takes up about 80% of my brain every day, all the time. So yeah, that's where I started and stumbled several times.
It's where the addiction began.
For you though, Nick, you are way more into the writing world of it, but you said you dropped back into the comic world. Was that because you wanted to write more, so you wanted to understand, you wanted to follow how other people wrote comics more?
Yeah, it was definitely partly a research thing in that we've told this story several times, but Harry and I, the way we started Snow the Dawn is we were on our way to get food one day. We used to go to get like a burger or whatever once or twice a week, and we'd always have like a 40-minute drive to wherever we were going. And so on these journeys you just chat about everything, and one day I was talking about how much I wanted to get to writing, and Harry was talking about how much he wanted to get into illustrating, and different ways we could approach that and do things. And I, up until recently, very, very recently, I never felt comfortable enough to write prose. I always really struggled with it, and I didn't think I had that ability. And I still think I'm wobbly on it. I'm a little bit better, but I still think I wobble there. And Harry and I just sort of chatted, and then suddenly we're like, oh, well, if you want to get into illustrating, I want to get into writing, there's a medium there where we could join together, and it's called comics. We could conquer it all. And then, just on this journey, we discussed everything that would be Snow. And so came back and started researching it. But in researching it, there was a lot for me to kind of understand, in that I felt like I'd read enough of the basics to know, or not know, but recognize how a comic book flows in terms of panel work and moment to moment and that kind of thing. But I didn't really have any idea about dialogue. I didn't really, because I hadn't read much in terms of singles, I didn't understand how to kind of get to a cliffhanger. And so a lot of that came from, I want to read as many singles as I can to see how that format works. And then graphic novel wise, it was very much a case of me wanting to read kind of mini series which either dealt with an origin, or they were just in and out kind of stories to see how in 3 or 4 issues or whatever they could tell a story, and the way that would tie off at the end, how they'd resolve the journey. And so I just fell really headfirst into everything. And again, at the time, I think I was really lucky that the time when I picked, because it was around about the time that the MCU was really ramping up. Yeah, like really ramping up. Like I think it was around the time of Guardians of the Galaxy, maybe. Great. So it was, peaking kind of MCU territory, and I think that really helped, because there were just so many books out at that point. There was just so much, and stuff like The Walking Dead had been going for a little while, so Image was starting to kind of build up and get kind of where it is now as like the home of all these great indie tales. So yeah, for me it was definitely a research thing, and then once I'd sort of let go of it being this, how do these work, I then had this addiction where it was just kind of, I needed the hit of reading a single comic every week. And so I just remember setting up an order with Forbidden Planet, and I was like, this is amazing. Every week
got to have that hit.
Yeah, I was like, man. In my head I was like, in the morning I can just have my breakfast, I can have a hot drink and read a comic. This will be amazing. This is what I want. And then it quickly, as addictions do, become overbearing, and you're like, oh my god, I've got too many books to read, I don't have the time, what do I do? How do I pick my favorites? And
this is like an AA comic meeting, because now what I want to do is talk to you about my issues of how many comics I read a day.
Yeah, it was very much that. And And so yeah, that was definitely where the love, I think, grew. I think it had always been part of me. I think in the sense that, you know, Spawn I'd read at such a young age because I was definitely in primary school when I was reading that. And again, it was the same as you, where, you know, it was odd issues. I don't think it was a complete run, and so I was sort of just taking it as face value. But then definitely when I made the decision to start writing comic books and reading them, I was kind of at the mindset, I was like, I need to start with an issue 1 and follow it through and see how that works, rather than trying to jump in at like issue 20 at a new story arc. It's got to be an issue 1 because I need to see how they do that. So yeah, I think that's really where the love kind of grew for me anyway. Nice.
It's strange how you mentioned there a couple of, well, we'll talk about comic addiction first, actually, because I am addicted. I am reading comics like a madman. Sometimes you and I text and you say, have you read this and have you read this? And sometimes one of us is a little bit further ahead. But I try and read a comic in the morning. I try and read a comic on my lunch break, and I usually will read a comic quite close to bedtime. And I can't get enough of it. It's not, I would read all night if I basically had the choice, because I want to take everything in. Wherever I heard a good thing or a bad thing about a comic, my boss at my work, he owns a huge comic chain throughout Norway, which is where I live. People don't know that by now. I live in Norway. Nick lives in England, but I am from England, as you can tell from the accent. And he started the shop and selling comics, and he's someone that I will pester, I guess. I'll send him a message every night. I have to be quite restrained because I don't want to overdo it and test my luck. But I'll sit there at lunchtime and I'll read a comic. I'll send a picture and I'll be like, this was it. It happened with Crossover. I had it on my desk. I bought it and I read it on my lunch break. And I thought, oh man, I've got to tell him right now, because, you know, we could get in several copies of this for work in the future. And I can't stop either talking to you about comics. I was reading a comic in bed the other day next to my wife, and I just said, oh, that was a shit ending. And she has no idea what's going on, but I look half traumatized. And that was Three Jokers, by the way, that I was reading, because it wasn't a shit ending, but it was a very disappointing ending, Nick. Yeah. Because they built it up very well. Well, they've been building it up for 6 years. And then you're so excited about it. Then it got delayed. And then it finally comes out. And issue 1 was, oh, this is intriguing. And then issue 2, okay, they're building it up. And there's some good stuff with Red Hood. And then issue 3, it felt like they just thought, I don't know what we're going to do here. So we'll just wrap it up. We're going off subject. But did you understand the ending?
I got the Killing Joke reference.
Yeah.
So that all clicked with me. Although, for some reason, I'd already thought that was just canon. I'd always just thought that was the Joker. Like I'd never really questioned it. I'd never gone, well, that's clearly not a thing.
It was super strange.
Yeah, it just didn't. I think I texted you when I finished it, actually. I'm pretty sure.
You did, because this is what I'm saying about you sometimes being ahead of me and vice versa. You read it and I thought, oh God, I just need to go and get my copy. And I was in bed and I was like, this is it. It's going to be a really good ending. I'm just going to ignore what Nick said. I'm just going to read it. And then I said to Yannicka, I said, ugh. I was like, Nick was right. I should never have turned the last 5 pages. But what I would say is it's worth reading for people people should read it still. That's the thing. You should always read a comic whether someone says it's good or bad, because your take on it could be completely different. Yeah. I know so many people that love Rat Queens, but I am not a fan of Rat Queens. But the shop that I manage, we sell it a lot. You know, there are some people that love the Walking Dead TV show, but they hate the Walking Dead comic, or they've never tried the Walking Dead comic. You've got to try it. You have to try these things. Yeah. I've forgotten where the point was at the beginning of this. Oh, addiction. Being addicted to comics. Yes. Yeah. So what were you going to say?
I was going to say as well, and I think with something like Three Jokers, it's to the extent that even if the story doesn't click for you, you're experiencing the art as well. And the art on Three Jokers is amazing. Like
the art, the panel work is fantastic.
Yeah. It's even really well made.
there are some good bits in the third issue. It just at the end, and it happens so often with some comics, it really just fell completely flat for me. Sometimes you can get to the end of the comic and you think, oh man, God Country, for instance, which is the same team that did Crossover. I got to the end of God Country and I thought, I wish there was more God Country in my life. And when I found out it was done, I thought, oh, that's such a shame. And that's a nice noise to have on the podcast. And Crossover is apparently in the same universe, so obviously it's kind of carried on a little bit, but there are loads of comics where you want more and more, but there are often these days, there are too many that you just think could it have been more? Did they need maybe another issue or another 2 issues? And it's all about restraints from the publisher and everything. But then you have something, Mr. Miracle and Strange Adventures now, which is 12 issues long. But we're in issue 6 and I cannot get enough of it. It's such a good comic that I hope it doesn't fall flat at the end anyway. But that's where the addiction is strong, because it's like Christmas. I just want issue 7 now.
It's tough. I told you this recently, but the comic shop I worked in unfortunately closed down, and so when it did, I sort of made the decision that I wanted to switch from singles to graphic novels and just reading things as a complete run, trying to wean myself off the monthly or the weekly hit in some case. But yeah, I was just trying to get off of it, and it's worked to some extent, in that stuff like Strange Adventures, which I am desperate to read, I've managed to just avoid, and just anytime the art comes up, I just like the cover and then just move on. I'm not going to look at it too much because I know I'll only go deep on it. So I sort of ignore it. But then when something like a big event comes along, for instance, metal, like death metal, I can't help myself with that. And so it's everything. I need the main series, I need the tie-ins.
I was going to say, if you're going to pick one comic that you have to go all in on, but you couldn't buy any more single issues at a time. It's something like Scott Snyder, Greg Capullo, Batman crossover. There's so many spin-offs in this one.
Yeah.
Did you read Robin King?
Yeah, it's good.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah.
Fantastic. It's also oddly funny. It's so sadistic, but it's when he phases Adam Strange into the wall.
Yeah.
Perfection.
Yeah, it was really good.
Anyway,
the art was amazing as well. One of those books that
crazy.
Hit every marker. Yeah.
But the nice thing about some of those single issues, and the reason why I think it would be, because I tend to get the single issues, I usually get the TP, or I hold off if it's Image, because they do these like beautiful hardcover editions. If I try and hold off for a couple of volumes just to see if they will do it or not for my collection. But something like Gideon Falls, there's only going to be 5 volumes. Are they going to do one big thing? They're going to break it down. So I've just gone for the TPs and the single issues, obviously. Yeah. But there's something nice about the TPs, that you get so much extra at the end of it as well. Or usually you get some artwork or a script. Give me a script and I'm set for life.
Yeah.
So I can't remember the point of where we started this again now, but I'm just getting so excited about talking about comics that I'm going into mini reviews. But I guess this podcast could be whatever we want, as long as it relates around comics.
Comics, yeah.
So, you go.
Oh, I was going to say, I completely agree to the extent that having made that switch to graphic novels and TBs, to me, it feels more like a journey.
Yep.
In that when I read something, it's like, I said to you recently that I read Long Halloween. It was the first time I read it. There was something really comforting about knowing every night I could dip into that world and it was continuing the same story. And even if that was, 12 nights, because it was one issue a night, it's just nice to know that that's there and that it's a consistent universe to dip into. And it's the same. When I read Undiscovered Country recently, again, I hadn't read the singles of that. That was really hard to avoid because I absolutely love Scott Snyder, as everybody on this podcast knows, and Charles Soule. So waiting for that was hard, but getting it was just amazing because it was such a interesting read, and it felt like I was just on a journey for for 5-6 days. So when you do finish it, you're sort of like, oh no. Whereas with the month reads, even though you're getting that hit every month, I always feel like when I came to the end of something, because it had gone on for so long, you were almost more accepting of the ending in some way. That you kind of feel like, I lived with you for so long. It's cool. Happy to end it here. It's been good. Whereas a graphic novel, you can run through it in a night if you want to, or like I do, it's one chapter a night, and it always hits me a little bit more, I think.
I look at it, I have two ways of thinking about the single issues and TP way of it, and that's, so with Saga, I was too late on the single issues of Saga. I didn't catch it early enough. Even though I knew it was coming out, I didn't go for it. It was actually my old manager at my current job. She came to one of the comic nights that I run in Stavanger, and she spoke about Saga, and I thought, I've heard about Saga, but I've not really ever got to it. And she basically shoved it in my face. And that's one of the only TPs that I read as a TP. And I read it so quickly that a bit of me is gutted that I have to wait for so long. Whereas if I had the single issues, I would know that the wait would be, I read a single issue and, like I said, like a lunch break or whatever, maybe read it twice. But I know another one's coming a month later, so I can hold off. God, we sound terrible, Nick. It sounds like we've got real issues. But we don't. We're just obviously over exaggerating a little bit, but at the same time not.
Yeah.
Because when I have single issues and then I get a TP, sometimes if I read the single issues and I think I didn't quite enjoy it, there's something quite nice, like you said, about reading it beginning to end. So something like Three Jokers, maybe if I read it as a collected, which I will do because I will buy the hardcover edition as well, even for something that I said fell flat at the end. But like you said, with all the components, like some of the writing, the artwork, the panels, to have it collected as well. And if I read that again, which I would do, I might enjoy it more. And that has happened with me with several comics before. I've read the single issues and thought, yeah, it was okay, but I've got it as a TP because I do, and I've enjoyed it a lot more when it's collected and I've read it in one, like over a span of a few days. I've enjoyed it a lot more. I don't even know how that logic makes sense, but it does happen. I mean, I read a lot of the Hellboy stuff as single things, but if I hold those library editions in my hand, oof, and you go through it page by page and you really sink into it and that world, then the payoff is so good after you've read it because it's just so damn good.
Do you find working in a comic book shop is firstly possibly the best job, and secondly, do you find yourself reading stuff that you wouldn't have read if you were just a consumer, like if you were just a customer?
Yes. I was going to ask this because we both worked in comic shops, obviously. So I'm going to do a long haul answer now.
Go for it.
So I work in a comic shop in Norway, like I said. When I moved to Norway, everything was obviously, it was a different country. Didn't find a job straight away for about a year or so. Was looking, loads of stuff. The first day I moved to Norway, my wife told me there was a comic shop. And I went the first time I visited, when she moved to Stavanger, Norway, the first day I visited, she said, there's a comic shop in town. We walked past this comic shop. It was a tiny, tiny comic shop, books and some board games and some comics. But that day it was closed. And I thought, okay, I'll go in the next day. Went the next day, the whole store had closed down. And I was absolutely gutted. I thought, she's lied to me. Take it to your country and I'd come from like Forbidden Planet and things like that where comics were on your door. And then they moved down the road to a bigger place. I was like, oh, thank God. And I went in every day I went into this comic shop because I thought, if I'm going to find a job, I hope it's somewhere like this because I've got such a passion for comics and it's a new language. To be fair, I don't speak a lot of Norwegian at work anyway, but at least I knew I could talk. If I was going to learn it or when I was going to learn it, I could talk about comics because I'm so passionate about them. Anyway, didn't get a job there, but I worked at the university and I bumped into someone called Rasmus, and he showed me the ropes at university, and he didn't talk about anyone's comics because he didn't think anyone else cared. And he opened the door, and I said, oh, I'm really into comics. But he was into independent comics and Belgian comics and French comics, and I was into Spider-Man, completely different worlds, but together, back and forth. We became really close, and we made this comic night in Stavanger, did it weekly, and more people came to these nights talking about comics, which is where I met my old manager who worked at Outland. And me and her and I started talking, and she saw how passionate I was. And then eventually there was a job opening to run the comic section in Outland. Her and I talked. I didn't beg her. I just said, I'm really interested. Had an interview, and I got the job.
Nice.
And 4 years later, I'm now working in this comic shop as a manager. And they sell all sorts, comics, board games, Lego. It's a fantastic place to be. And I'm so lucky because, to answer your question originally now, is that there are so many comics that I never would have read for not being in this particular shop. I've worked in other shops before, comic shops, and they're super mainstream. Marvel, DC, not much else going on. But here, when I started, they had loads of different comics and manga and things like that, which was somewhere I would never have dipped my toe in either originally. But being there and seeing everything coming in, every week we get new comics. And yes, my focus as the person who runs the comics there is to focus on the big hitters, because that's what I think more people enjoy: Marvel, DC, Boom, Dark Horse, IDW. But I've definitely picked up along the way more independent comics. I read a comic weeks ago. It's called Waves. Never ever would I've looked up this comic, but it deals with a very delicate subject about baby loss, which my wife and I have had an issue with in the past. And I read it, and it hit me so hard. And I bought it for my wife, who also read it, who also gave it to a friend. And that comic came into our shop. I ordered it in through previews, which most people may know about previews, and you order in your comics. I wouldn't have read it. I wouldn't have come across it, I don't think. So yes, over the last 4 years working in this comic shop, I've there's so much that I've read that I probably would never have come across. And I'm lucky to be in a position to work in that environment where I'm surrounded by comics, Nick.
Yeah.
And I invest everything into that job, and because it repays me with, I basically get paid to buy comics. So my money that I get given, I then invest back into comics to read, and that makes me a very happy man.
Yeah.
My wife, not overly pleased, and you can see behind me how much I've spent on comics. But yeah, I don't know if I did answer your question. I kind of got sidetracked because just talking about my work really. But yes, I've read a lot of comics, but you obviously worked in a comic shop as well. So your question back at you, did you find yourself reading a lot more?
Yeah, so it was a two-part question, which was...
Did I answer the second part?
Second part was, did you read new stuff? And the first part was, do you think it's potentially the best job?
Right. Yes. Yes, I do think it's potentially the best job.
I think
like
that
I
was
said,
clear.
I'm super lucky. I love my job. I generally do. And I know I'm going to let you talk, but to be in a different country and to work is something that I love. And the people that I work with and the people that are above me that seem to have a lot of respect and vice versa for me. And they understand how passionate I am about comics. I'm lucky because, like I said, I've got the comic night. I run a comic convention, and my job revolves around comics. Also, loads of other elements as well, which I also love. Like, I could build Lego all day, Nick, as well. If I have a comic and then build on Lego, I'm laughing.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's yes, I do think I'm in one of the best jobs, because I'd love to make it as a comic writer as well, or work for Marvel one day. But this is perfect for my life, and I'm very happy.
Yeah.
Good, Nick. You go.
Yeah, I'm much the same. I think it's definitely the best job I'd had, in that I loved the ability to read books, get excited about books, and then tell customers about those books. And there's a real gratification, I think, in when a customer does read a book that you've recommended and then comes back and they're like, I absolutely loved it. I think that's a really, really positive feeling. And to get that almost weekly as well with new books, it was awesome. You'd look forward to, usually for me, the slowest day was like a Monday or a Tuesday. And then when the books come in on a Wednesday through till Sunday was customers coming in to pick those books up, and so you talk to all of the customers, and it just felt like there was a community, and there wasn't a lot of negativity. There was a lot of positivity around, what are you reading? This is what I've really enjoyed. I loved this. Have you heard of this? What's coming out? It just really felt like a place you could kind of go in and, spend an hour just talking, which I did loads with customers, and it's just a brilliant part of the job, I think.
It's a brilliant part. You're right. I mean, I didn't even say that, but you're right. It's brilliant. I have some subscribers that come in. There's one guy who originally we didn't quite hit it off on the same wavelength of comics, but he's recommended me comics. I've recommended him comics, and he'll come in and actually say, I say, like, you should subscribe to. He did it with Dark Knight's Metal, not the new one, the original one. I said, you need to read this, and he came into me directly, said to my face, that was a load of shit. I thought, what are you talking about? That is not a load of shit. Like, the last thing you recommended me was great. This shit. I was like, oh, okay, so I'll try again next time. So now I just put subscriptions in his box. So I put like Rorschach in there, and he's like, I loved Rorschach. I was like, oh, great. So you kind of figure out their taste, and that's where the fun is, and the excitement is, that if you can put something that you really enjoy onto someone else, and then you can talk about it. It's a great feeling. I had a customer that comes in. He comes in nearly every Christmas, and I recommended this like 3 years ago or 2 years ago. I recommended him Seven to Eternity, nice. Gideon Falls when that came out, things like that. And every Christmas he comes back, and he doesn't come in all the time. He comes in and gets the next volumes once a year. So he's very restrained. He's not like us.
Yeah.
He takes sweet time. But he also then he's recommended those comics to other people, and those people have come in and asked to speak to me.
Cool.
To recommend the same comics or something similar. And oddly, when we had our scan for my baby, I was in the hospital sitting down with Yannicka, and this guy walked past me, and he went, Luke, and I was like, oh, hey. And I couldn't recognize who it was. And he came over, and he's in this doctor's coat. He's some sort of brain surgeon. I was like, he came over, he just came and shook my hand, and it was like I was a celebrity. And Yannicka's like, oh, hi. And he's like, shook Yannicka's hand. And he was just like, yeah, I read those comics from a few months ago. It's brilliant. Was it Black Science? Black Science is phenomenal. And he was like, I'm going to come back, and I'm going to come and get some more comics. I was like, oh, okay, like, great. So then Yannicka's just like, who was that? I was like, oh, it's a guy that I recommend comics to once a year. And he was so happy to see me. I was like, that's the comic guy. And I was like, great. And it's actually happened several times around Norway, because there aren't many British, well, there's loads of British people here, but that work in the big comic shop in the city.
Yeah.
It was just crazy. I got such a buzz from it. Like I said, I felt like a celebrity. I was like, yeah, it's just Stavanger's best brain surgeon coming to me for comic advice. So it was a good moment. But you are exactly right. That is one of the best parts of working in a comic shop.
Yeah. And I used to work in a video game store, and that was never quite the same. I think it was always, I don't know if it's the cost, that because a game is so expensive that if you recommend one to somebody and it's not what they want, then it's a harder hit. Whereas a comic's like £3-4 quid. If it's a graphic novel, it's 10-15 at most, kind of thing, depending on what edition it is. But I think because of the cost element, people are more susceptible to just trying different things and seeing what works for them.
Yeah, so I think with video games as well, you probably talk more to your friends.
Yeah.
About what you're playing. Whereas if you're coming into a shop to buy a video game, that's what you've come to get, isn't it? You're not coming to, if someone's going to come and buy, I don't know, Death Stranding from you for £50, and you say, well, if you like Death Stranding, you'll love Mario Tennis.
Yeah.
And then, I'll just go get another £50.
Yeah.
But, whereas comics, obviously, if someone's buying a single issue for $3.99, you could probably throw a couple more on there. If someone's buying a graphic novel, you could say, well, you'll love this. I just finished volume 2, and it's the shit. So,
yeah, there's a real, like I said, gratifications, the whole process of just working in a comic book shop. And then I think the second part of that, did I read new stuff? I definitely did. And that was a case of previews. In the looking through previews, I'd look at what art grabbed me. It was always what interests me, and I'd read the blurbs if the story sounded good. I'd invest in that as well. And then it was a case of, the tricky thing with our story is just because we were in a small town, it was difficult to judge how many copies you should buy of a first issue. And generally with indie comics, which was the ones that we seem to recommend more than DC or Marvel, the trouble was always how many of those do you get in, because it's sort of, if they come in and then it sells out day one, you can't order any more until there's a second printing, if there's a second printing.
Yeah.
And so people sort of miss out on that moment. So it became a case of kind of saying, like, once you figured out people's tastes, it was, okay, you've liked this, I think you'll like this, do you want to order the first issue just to try it out, and then we can pick up the second one. But it could sell out day one, and it could be something you're really interested in. So it definitely introduced me to a lot of new things. And the same with publishers like Boom. I don't think I'd read anything from before. I'd always just read Marvel, DC, or Image, or Dark Horse. So Boom really came into my life in a big way. And
they're huge now. It
feels
like they're just, the stuff they've got going on is crazy.
Yeah, and with Boom as well, it's such a diverse library. I mean, it's the same with Image. I think Boom are definitely kind of challenging Image at times in terms of their content, because they've got really heavy hitting stories that are emotionally kind of impacting. They've got some really good horror, and then they've also got a really nice range of like young adult kids kind of books, but also then that sort of teen to early adult period.
I think they've been perceived for a long time as a sort of kid to teenager type publication. I think that's changed now with a lot of their titles. Something's Killing the Children, Once and Future.
Yeah,
those. I mean, when I first came across them, the first title that I read was Lumberjanes, which was put on my lap basically. And when I read that, I thought, okay, this is what Boom are basically about. This and Giant Days, which I think is Boom Box, but I think that's changed now. But again, through previews, like you said, you're sitting there looking through it and you're finding out what people's tastes are. Those sort of publications, you really get a sense that there's a lot going on there that maybe would fall under the rug if you were just someone coming into the store and didn't know anything else. Yeah,
and I think again as well, I wonder if that partially is down to us as people in terms of the excitability we have over comic books, in that, as much as I love Comic Legends because it was the store that, it was my first ever comic book store, I don't remember them ever being that talkative in the sense that
they never talked.
It wasn't like you go in,
you're right,
you could just have a conversation. Whereas when I was working in the shop, which was in the same town as Comic Legends, I always made an effort to kind of say, like, hey, and how are you doing? And, if they were shopping around, I'd always kind of say, what are you reading at the moment? Try and recommend them things. And then, if they became a regular, it became that weekly conversation of just what can I kind of offer you? What are you interested in? And is there anything coming out over the next month that you're kind of down for reading? And I think, I don't know if that's because, again, the state of nerddom, that with the MCU and DC films and all that stuff, I don't know if because it's more in the limelight, we're more open about it.
Yep.
Like you were saying, how, you were a little bit like embarrassed about it back in the day. I wonder whether that's because when we were growing up, it wouldn't have been as easy to approach somebody and kind of go, have you read this comic? Because you'd be a bit more like shy about it, a bit more sheepish.
You would be shy about it. I mean, things like the MCU and obviously the other Marvel films and Watchmen, 300 and things we touched upon, it opened up a whole doorway for people to it sounds like we're talking about something really serious, like gay rights or something like that, or something that's super important. But this, I mean, I didn't really talk to it when everything started kicking off a bit more with how successful Iron Man was and the Dark Knight trilogy. How many copies of things like The Long Halloween in year one sold after the Dark Knight trilogy came out and shifted off the shelves. That was actually one of my questions. If you don't mind me just jumping into it,
go for it.
Do you think we're at the height of it now? Do you think it's going to go downhill eventually? Do you think we're because there's so many comics out there now, which is a great thing. It's great to, you have something like previews and, have these fantastic writers like Scott Snyder, Donny Cates, Jeff Lemire, these guys that we're very high on. Loads of other writers that, I could just list loads, and artists and letterers and colorists, and we're very spoilt for choice, and we weren't. They were probably out there, but now it's all mainstream, and social media is such a big deal. And do you think it will dip again eventually, and it will just be forgotten? Or do you think there's too much? It's too rich, because every it feels like every comic that comes out now gets attached to being a TV show or a film or something is coming. Like there's nothing that can't be written now that isn't soon to be a Netflix TV show or anything like that. Do you see it slowing down, or
I don't think so. I see the MCU slowing down. Maybe taking a shift to like more series based stuff, because it's that hit of you can pay $5.99 a month and you can get 6 or 8 hours out of a Marvel character, rather than pay like 15 quid or whatever a cinema ticket is for 2 hours.
Yep.
And you get a similar budget. So I could see that sort of shifting in time. But I think also, I feel like the superhero genre of films it's like the Western. It'll hit a point where everything's too similar and you need something else to come in and take over. However, from my eyes, I don't think that affects the comic industry, because I think what it's done is so many people have enjoyed those films and have switched to comics, who have then realized that comics aren't just superheroes, that it's now just a form of literature, which I don't think it was back in the day, because definitely when I was in high school and kind of going towards uni, there was definitely a lot of talk about whether comics were considered literature, or not like a kid's thing, but more like media. It never really held the gravitas. Whereas
no, it does now.
Yeah, I think now there's so many stories that it does hold its place as a point of literature, because you can read things like you said with Waves, or like even just horror. Like horror in comic books has come along so much just in the last 3-4 years. Stuff like Gideon Falls, it's absolutely bonkers.
Crazy.
And it's something that can only be realized, I think, in comic books, which is that form of, you've got a bit of narration, you've got tight dialogue, and then you've got the visuals to match it. And through the visuals, you've got an endless budget. You don't have to worry about, oh, we can't do this visual effects shot because we don't have the money. It's there.
Yeah.
So I don't think comics industry might shift in terms of digital and print. I think that's something that will change at some point.
Don't say that, Nick. Don't say
I know,
that.
it sounds it is, but I think it's coming.
No, Nick, no.
But I think movie-wise, it will, just because it'll be too much. Which is where I think the series will help, because I think the series
I think so.
It's a breath of fresh air. It's I don't know what to expect in terms of an 8-hour Marvel presentation. What does that look like?
I mean, they kind of feed each other, don't they? The like films and stuff, because there are going to be some people. You take something like The Boys. The Boys have been around for a long time now, but I bet their sales in those comics, especially since they've re-released them in new editions, people have watched The Boys on Amazon and thought. I mean, I've seen it plenty in Outland where I work. That okay, yeah, I really want to read The Boys. Same with something like Umbrella Academy. Maybe it isn't as old, but maybe it is. But people are watching these things, and then they're like you said, it's not just superhero related necessarily. I know The Boys is, and Umbrella Academy is technically, but they're just two examples. But they're coming in, and they're seeing this whole new world. They're saying, oh, okay, yeah, I'm going to read The Boys, and then you could say, oh, if you like The Boys, you'll like this, and you'll like this, and you could go with this. So yeah, I don't think it will slow down either. I just was asking if you thought it would, but I think it will feed. I just do not want to live in a world where everything is digital. I've just come over the fact that I should buy things on digitally Blu-ray instead of buying Blu-rays. That's only so I can buy more comics.
Yeah.
But I couldn't handle. I mean, I could handle it. I'll get over it. But printed, there's something about a printed comic, and whether it's a single issue or a trade paperback or a nice hardcover or an omnibus, it's just something so good as a comic collector, not as the addict that we were talking about, but just as a collector and a fan and someone who loves to read comics. I read comics digitally as well. I get single issues. I try out some single issues that, like you said, I've missed on Diamond. There's a second printing, or I get told about them, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to read it now. I'd just get it on Comixology or something, for instance. But I don't get the same out of it digitally as I do physically.
Yeah,
Yeah. So I hope that never happens, Nick.
Yeah, I hope it doesn't. I definitely think graphic novels will continue. I just don't know about the singles market. I think the singles market will be something that
yes, I think I do think that will happen. I think graphic novels will always be around, which I'll be happy with if that does happen. But
yeah,
I think eventually the big guns, they're going to look at it and think we're making more money. I mean, it's no different to the films now, is it? I was reading in the news today. They said about Mulan. They said about what they're thinking about doing with Wonder Woman and Black Widow. That Disney have seen theirs. They made quite a lot of money streaming Mulan, maybe close to what they would have done at the cinema. And if they do that with Black Widow, which it looks like they might do, as a tester, okay, so if everyone went to watch this, so potentially they could say, well, people are just going to buy them digitally and then they'll physically go and get the TPs. It's scary world, Nick.
I think the interesting thing with digital, in that it was something I didn't realize until about 2 years ago, actually, when I was going through the Eisner list and they have like the best digital comic, I'd never really thought about just how creative you can be with a digital comic, and that some of the ones I read, especially this year, it was a really hard call for me because they can do really interesting things in terms of motion. And it's sort of that, I mean, it blurs a line because it's like, at what point does it become an animation rather than a comic? But I think when people figure out cool ways to do it, that for me makes digital more interesting. I think when it's just panel by panel, as cool as that is, once you've done it, 10, 15 times, especially when it's your own book as well, the amount of times I've gone through Snow the Dawn or Odyssey on Comixology to like screen grab or anything, it loses its magic.
Yeah.
Whereas I think the big two, I think if they were to look at it and probably start investing money into new ways to do digital comics that become a little bit more interactive, a bit more kind of pulpy, I think that's when you get really interesting digital ideas. But I think we're still a little bit way off there because the infrastructure for that just isn't there. But yeah, I think that's something.
Good.
Well,
you go. Sorry.
I was going to say
we're so British. Sorry. No, you're sorry. I'm sorry.
The last thing I was going to ask you, just before we finish, is at what point did you make the decision that you wanted to write comic books?
I mean, when I was at school, so my middle brother, he was really into hip hop, super into hip hop, which you may not have known that about him, but he was.
Nice.
And he used to, there was a moment years ago, well, not years ago, I was probably at university, so years ago, many, many moons ago. And I was in his old bedroom. I was visiting home and I was in his old bedroom and we were talking back and forth. And he said, I don't know how it came up, but he said he used to write hip hop lyrics down when he was younger. So when he was at school, and he used to write hip hop lyrics and try and write his own songs because he was so into it. And obviously when you're passionate about something, you obviously daydream that you're going to be into it. And it was like this revelation because I used to write down comics. I used to write down in this book that I have several notepads, probably all with Spider-Man on the cover. This would be a great comic. So I started writing plots and ideas and like chapters like it was a book and everything. And he was like, we're both super passionate about these things and this is what we're doing. It was a really sad moment of realizing how nerdy we were. And anyway, I was doing it when I was young and I've always wanted to write a comic. I think that I have it in me to write something really great because I feel like my knowledge is so much and I feel like I'm a good storyteller and I like to talk. And I thought, why not put it down paper? I have so many ideas and I've just written them all down. It's just never happened in terms of, until you and Harry came along with the Virtuous comic that I wrote, that I've had someone say, yeah, you should try this. Here's a story, see what you can do with it. And I really enjoyed doing it. And obviously when we did Odyssey, I really enjoyed doing that. And I've started to write my own thing now, but already without having someone to bounce off and work with on it, I'm finding it hard to find the time. But always, I mean, my daydream is to one day be on a panel talking about something I've written, whether it was you and I and Harry involved or something else. But what I think is I've surrounded myself with other things because I don't see that dream coming to fruition. I think I will be working either happily involved with reading comics and selling comics, or being somewhere along that line, or whether it's the comic nights or whatever it turns out to be. I'll be involved somewhere, but I don't know if I'll make it as the writer, but I've always wanted to do it since I was young. How about you?
I believe in you.
Thanks, Nick. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, mine was, like I said, it was just a conversation with Harry that spiraled into Snow. And then I think the thing that took me by surprise, which shouldn't have, but it definitely did with comic books, is the collaboration process. In that, I'm sure we'll hear part of this next week when we've got Harry on. But my rapport with Harry is, we're just very much on the same wavelength.
Yeah.
And I think that always really inspires me, in that Harry and I can go on a walk, or we can drive somewhere, and on that drive we can suddenly have a new idea for a story or something. It can happen really quick because of the way we just bounce things off. And I've never really encountered anyone like that until you and I started talking again. Because you and I, so you'd mentioned it, we went to primary school together, but we were separate years, and then high school, we were sort of bookended. I think my one encounter with you in high school that I still remember was, I think I was waiting for my brother in sixth form, and you were in the common room setting up a GameCube on a projector. And I remember thinking, I was like, that dude's awesome. Like, he's cool. He's got it down. And I was just 7-year-old. I was in year 7, so I'd been 13.
What are you doing in high school when you're 7, Nick?
What was I doing?
Get out.
I was sat there with like my bag on that was probably way too big and just feeling awkward and weird. But I remember just being like, this dude's awesome. And then you and I think just didn't really message until we both were on Twitter, and then started realizing that we were tweeting about basically the same things.
Well, I think what set it off again was, it was at the pub. All my stories have a pub involved normally, but we were at a pub, and I was getting super drunk with my big brother, my eldest brother. You were there. I don't know if you were with Alex or you were just...
I think I was there because we sort of had mutual friends. I think it was...
I don't know. Something, whatever happened, we all started sitting at the same table. I think because maybe my brother was teaching you to drive.
Yeah.
Something like that. And then we had the whole Andrew Garfield Spider-Man versus Amazing Spider-Man 2 versus Dark Knight Rises conversation. And I think after that, it was talking to each other on Twitter, and then it was like, holy shit, like all this time has gone by in our lives.
Yeah.
Where you could have been that person that came in the common room and saw me sit at the GameCube. I could have gone, Nick, got a comic in my bag. I don't know why you're in here when you're 7 years old. Let's talk about comics. But yeah, that's where it happened. Yeah, it was. Yeah, you're right. So we then bonded over comics, and
and there was definitely a thing then that I think after we'd talked about comics for a while, that as Harry and I got Snow going, and there was talk of us sort of opening up into this universe, that I knew that I wanted you involved in that because I just knew you'd have the sensibility in terms of crafting a story, because you've read so many comics. I was like, he's going to know the ins and outs. It's not going to be in terms of like a job of me going like, you've never written a comic book before, here's all this material you need to read to sort of understand it. We could give you an idea and you could run with it.
Yeah.
And then
I'd never structured it. I'd written comics down on my own merit, but I'd never really structured one, which is why I guess you were also my editor in that sense, because I studied comics, and I looked at scripts of writers, and I love reading the scripts of the writers and things like the director's cuts, but it was the first time I'd ever really gone for it. And that was only because of obviously yourself and Harry giving me the chance to do it.
but that was kind of what I was saying as well, is that when we started working with that and we were sort of helping very minimally edit Virtuous, like I don't remember doing much editing on that, to be honest. It was the first time I'd felt that rapport again, like I felt with Harry, where it was kind of like a bouncing idea, which is why when we got to Odyssey, I remember talking to Harry and kind of saying, I want to write this thing with Luke, because what we'd set out was just a massive scope. And I said, I'd prefer if the story was a collaborative approach in terms of bouncing this idea with somebody, because I'll bounce the story with Harry all the time. Odyssey was a fairly constantly shifting thing up until the last minute. Actually, even when we were lettering it, Harry and I were still throwing things around, but it was the sense that I wanted that from a writer perspective, because Harry comes from a very visual point of view, as well as just in terms of like, does the story work A to B, but it's from a point of view going like, visually, this is what we're going to aim for, this kind of what I'm thinking, and then I sort of translate that into the story. And I think working with you on that just reaffirmed my love for the collaboration process.
Yep.
And that's now what I always look for in terms of writing comics. Like, I'm writing a novella at the moment, which is prose, and it's just purely me, which is fine. However, there are times where I just kind of go, I wish I could just send this to somebody and go, what should we do next? What do you think? What goes here? But it's all sort of on you, which, you know, the flip side of that is that you go like, this is purely, it's all me. There's nobody else really interfering with the approach. But I really miss it when I'm not writing a comic book, because I don't have that collaboration process. And yeah, I think that's definitely a thing that stuck with me, and I think it's why I'll always continue to write comic books, because there's just nothing like it. There really isn't.
It's good fun, isn't it? And it's nice. I mean, I think with me trying to write one now, on and off, it'd be nicer if I was doing it with someone as well. But we used to have, I mean, the comic night, since COVID has been around, we haven't had one since February, and that was a place to also bounce ideas from a lot of creative people.
Yeah.
A lot of them were artists, but there were writers there as well. And you just, you know, you could have that bit of a window to bounce things off of people. But you know, it just seems like it's kind of gone for now with everything going on in the world. But yeah, I think collaborations are good. I mean, I never would have got something as good as Odyssey out there without writing it with you, obviously. So it was a really good experience, and obviously we will have chapter 2 out
next
year, which should be lovely.
Yeah.
Cool. So I think we're going to do another one of these comic ones in the future, which will probably dive more into sort of comics maybe we've read recently, or our favorite comics that we've read. Kraven's Last Hunt, Spider-Man.
Fancy.
And the next podcast we're doing is the Snyder Cut.
Yes.
Which we're going to have our guest, which is Harry, who we've spoken about multiple times on multiple podcasts.
Yes.
So he's going to be joining us, and we're going to talk about, I think, probably Harry's love for, I don't know, all things Snyder.
Yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of gushing from Harry and I. Harry will probably absolutely gush over Jared Leto's Joker, which is, you know.
And I'm going to be there to knock it all back down. Because whereas I am a fan of some of it, I also do not like a lot of it.
You could come out of this next podcast and go, oh my God, I've never envisioned those films this way. And
I'm going to be like, oh man, holy shit. Got to watch me Suicide Squad again.
Or just really randomly you'll come out and then just suddenly go, do you know what, Andrew Garfield is the best Spider-Man?
What? It won't happen.
Never know.
If I come out of that podcast, if I come out of a Snyder Cut podcast thinking Andrew Garfield is the best Spider-Man, you've done something really, really well, Nick.
Yeah. I'm working some magic at the moment. It'll happen.
You are. All right then, dude. Well, thanks everyone for listening, and we look forward to the next one. And you can find all our other podcasts on Apple and Spotify if you want to listen back to previous ones. And we hope you enjoy.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.